Hello, you are tuning in to AWANI Review with me, Cynthia Ng. Joining me on the show today is Najib Muhammad Noor, CEO of Strand Aerospace, a design, engineering, and consulting firm in the aerospace sector. Najib is also the president of Malaysian Aerospace Industry Association. Great to see you again, Najib, and thank you for making time to do this interview.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, when we talk about aerospace, it is such an interesting area. I mean, I've been reading about it over the weekend. Also, it's very wide because you have the commercial aviation side to defense, military, and then you even have things like space travel. So, if you can start with that, where does Malaysia sit now in the global aerospace industry ecosystem, and what do we actually do well in this space?
Okay. Yeah, good question, Cynthia. And yeah, not many Malaysians are aware, I think, of what it is that Malaysia does in aerospace. So historically, we had our beginnings in the maintenance, repair, and overhaul industry. So that's the maintenance of aircraft. After we have an airline, Malaysia Airlines, right? So that was in the 60s. That became quite successful. It became Malaysian Airlines Engineering. And then we began to develop capabilities in manufacturing. So in 1998 was the first Malaysia Aerospace blueprint. And there the country set its sights on developing manufacturing and design capabilities. So by the time that was over, the first blueprint in 2015, we had burgeoning aircraft manufacturing and design capability. And from 2015 2030, which is the second blueprint, we are trying to deepen and grow that so that Malaysia will become a regional hub. So in summary, we maintain, we manufacture, we design aircraft components, and we have in the past designed the whole aircraft as well as part of the general aviation industry, which is small aircraft. But generally today, we work for Airbus and Boeing. So that's what we do. And in space, we've also had satellite industry. And we are now, I think there are several companies which are tapping into the space telecommunications industry as well, the sort of the realms of Starlink and Elon Musk.
So if we talk about aerospace, let's focus in on manufacturing. For instance, when we talk about manufacturing in Malaysia, has always been associated with blue collar workers, and that's where aerospace comes in, because aerospace brings the innovation, brings the high tech, high value kind of manufacturing into Malaysia. You talked about blueprint. I think when Malaysia started the aerospace blueprint, it goes as far back as 1997. Now it's one of those key areas again highlighted in the 12 Malaysia plan, high impact industries.
Yeah.
If I'm not mistaken, the government plans to generate $30 billion in revenue, 30,000 jobs by 2025. But numbers aside, Najib, where do you see areas of growth within the sector for the coming years?
Okay, so we already had, as I said, a very strong manufacturing footprint, right? So we manufacture very large sections of the wings of Airbus and Boeing aircraft. So if you go down to Subang, for example, you will see these large leading edge and trailing edge of Airbus and Boeing aircraft being put together. And then the growth then happened in a few years before that, a few years ago for engines manufacturing as well. So we manufacture major parts of the Trent engines for Rolls-Royce in Serenda. And then in Penang, there's a company called Singapore Aerospace Manufacturing that does work for General Electric on smaller engines for the A320s and the 737s. So I think manufacturing is going to grow quite strongly. There was obviously a dip during the pandemic, but it's picking up much faster pace now, right? So it's quite interesting as the industry globally restarts. We're finding that Malaysia is being preferred as a manufacturing destination. So our biggest challenge now is to make sure we have the supply chain because we've got large companies which are well seated in Asia, like UMW Aerospace, like CTRM, and a few others. These are global players. but the SME supply chain supporting it needs to catch up. So a lot of growth in manufacturing. And in MRO, or maintenance, repair and overhaul, General Electric Aviation, just prior to the pandemic, was making something like 3 billion ringgit a year revenue. There was a dip during the pandemic, but now it's recovering fast, and with a very strong trajectory over the next 10 years to come up to maybe up to 10 billion or more ringgit per annum revenue, maintaining these engines, right? So lots of growth in MRO and manufacturing. And then you have spaces like drone technology, which will be followed by unmanned urban air mobility, which is sort of your kereta terbang, right? Those kind of things also will be kicking in, I think, within the next 10 years to meet sort of the carbon footprint targets of a lot of these OEMs. So yeah, it's a very exciting space right now.
Okay, I want to take your point about SMEs. You mentioned that there are still challenges, especially strengthening the supply chain. Where are those challenges? Why are SMEs not producing enough or that quality or capabilities that is needed to grow the ecosystem?
So aerospace has got a very stringent quality and safety requirements. Okay, that puts sort of another level of technical rigor required on the process control and the product control of companies. All right, and in order to be certified and able to do this kind of work, companies need to invest in a lot of capability development. So with a lot of our SMEs are more used to the consumer consumer goods market, right? Which has much less stringent requirements. This leap into aerospace and high technology is quite a large commitment for them. So that's where I think the pandemic now is forcing a lot of companies to think, what is the future for them? Can they continue doing mass consumption products, or do they need to go to higher value, more specialist products?
And how do you support local players technically and financially? Because you mentioned rightly, the world of aerospace involves a degree of perfectionism, that is not inherent to most industries. So qualification to aerospace standards is supremely high. The entry point, like you say, for SMEs is very high as well. So how can they be better supported?
So Aerospace Industry Association and as a consulting company strength with MITI via organizations like SME Corporation to look at handholding and coaching the leadership towards these transformations. There are also grants associated with modernization of their capabilities and the infrastructure. So those have been underway. But the benchmark would be, I think, in Singapore, where some of these programs targeted at SME transformation can last up to 3 to 5 years of continuous handholding with very large infrastructure and equipment grants with it. Right. The other thing is obviously talent and human capital that needs to support the sort of the vision of the new leadership, and training and apprenticeships meaning learning on the job. Those are requirements now for the industry to be able to cope with this very high learning curve that organizations need to climb, in order to be able to upskill and upgrade into the field, right? So I think a lot of support from the education and training infrastructure, which is, I think there's a lot of ideas and some movement there, but a lot more needs to be done.
I think I was speaking to some people from the industry, and they're saying that the same thing that you're saying, that there is a mismatch in terms of demand and supply when it comes to human capital, because we do have many training providers in the aerospace sector, but the lack of quality manpower may be a deterrent for other companies like big multinationals coming in. Do you see progress on that front when you mention things like internship, education? Has some of those things been mapped out in the Chalk Malaysia plan as identified as one of the high impact industries?
Yeah, so I think the Top Malaysia Plan and the National Industry 4.0 policy framework, I think those are the two driving documents that will be pertinent to the aerospace industry. Both of them highlight these things. And I'd just like to clarify, there's a difference between internships and apprenticeships. Okay, so internship is what you do as a 3 month attachment, 6 month attachments with a company as part of your sort of industrial experience, right? An apprenticeship is actually where you are apprenticing in a company, learning to do the work that you have to do, right? So apprenticing is sort of the old way of training, you know, master to apprentice, right? Now, having said that, you find that a lot of industries today, the learning actually is via this sort of methodology because a lot of tacit knowledge needs to be transferred from masters, if you like, or experienced people to inexperienced people. And tacit knowledge is not just, book knowledge, right? There's a lot of things which need to be transferred. So in order to have that, you have to have a strong foundation of trainers. We had that with the Malaysian MRO industry, maintenance, repair, overhaul industry, was a very long one. In manufacturing, we're developing that base, and design, we're developing that base, but we need more companies to be involved with design and build packages, and developing, more senior resource to be able to do these apprenticeships, and then institutions to be playing a part in these apprenticeships through sort of hybrid programs.
Okay, now speaking about knowledge transfer, I think if you look into the manufacturing space, yes, we do have a lot of tier one global OEM companies. You have Spirit, Aerosystems, and they're supported by, I think, CTRM, which is a local company. Yeah, and you have UMW Aerospace, you mentioned earlier, Strand, of course, your company. But what I understand is that the design and processes are usually held and determined by these companies, right? This tier one companies. So local manufacturers like us, we build to their requirements, which means we do have very little say into the designing and process. What does it take for us to move into more critical aspects of designing and production in the supply chain?
Well, I think, so this is a question of technology transfer. So technology transfer, historically, my observation of the idea of technology transfer in Malaysia is almost like a school going child and his teacher, right? So there's an expectation that someone will teach you, and you, as an empty vessel, will receive this knowledge, right? That's not how technology transfer works. So technology transfer works when two people, organizations have sort of the same level of maturity, right? And the one who needs the specific knowledge from the other, remember the same level is like two teachers training each other, right? On, a geography teacher training a maths teacher, maybe, right? So how do you transfer that knowledge, right? So what it requires is that if you have the maturity of the learning, then you're able to then request that kind of information, knowledge, responsibility from the organizations that you're trying to get that kind of work from. Yeah. So it is working with organizations, global organizations, as a partner, right, rather than a recipient. And I think that's where a lot of Malaysian industry, is not really in that space of maturity, right? They're very much in the receiving and doing, not so much in the co-thinking and problem solving.
As president of the Aerospace Industry Association, what is your wish list here? If you look at the potential that Malaysia has, right? I mean, you talk about ticking the boxes. We have a proven industrial base. We have a large talent pool, but we are also facing a lot of competition from emerging countries who want to be the Asia's aerospace hub. We have India, we have Taiwan, and I believe Thailand is also have their own ambitions. So, what's your thoughts on that?
Okay, so Malaysia's has everything to gain and everything to lose, right? I think that's really where we are, and that's not unique to the aerospace industry. I think if you look at the electronics industry, it is the same scenario. The electronics industry. I was listening to some podcasts just recently, and I hear stories of attempted developments for design and build for microprocessors, or chips, right? And failures in establishing these things because lack of the right kind of infrastructure support or the right kind of attitude by the people being hired, right? So I think we certainly need to position ourselves above what is the build to print market. The build to print market being that which you just receive the drawings or whatever it is, and then you just execute. Yeah. So we have to sit above that and say we are design and build, we are added value maintenance, right? Which means if there are problems beyond what has been defined, we are there to solve these problems. So at that added value sort of space, I think we have the right infrastructure for education in terms of how many institutions and so on and so forth we have. I think we're the biggest education hub in the region, right? But the challenge is then we've become our education has become very much a certificate producing mill, right? So it's not really industry linked, and you can't blame the educators fully for this because the industry has not matured to the sort of expectations of the education industry, right? If you look at it, there's still a lot of foreign labor dependency in our industries, right? So there's a vast asymmetry here in terms of expectations and readiness. Now, fortunately, I think with this pandemic, there's very high pressure to transform. In the past, where there wasn't that kind of pressure, I didn't see that acute sense of, well, it's do or die now. But I do feel it now. And I'm optimistic as well for the youth of the country, the ones that say, well, we'll have to start to build new kinds of companies because companies of all may be leaving the country. And you hear a lot of big multinationals also struggling today. GE, just a few weeks ago, has divided into 3 separate entities now, and that's just to be competitive, right? More agile, because all the startups are coming up, and nipping at their heels, right? So I think I'm optimistic that there will be change. But that is the kind of change that we need. We need a landscape change.
Now, speaking of startup, we've seen how startups, like for instance, I think banking, right? How fintech has really shaken up the industry, and the old guards, so to speak, are forced to change. Are we seeing something similar in Malaysia in the space of deep tech, in aerospace? Do we have that kind of startups in Malaysia?
A simple answer is no, right? So if you look at our startup landscape, most of it is to do with social entrepreneurship, retail, that sort of thing, right? So deep tech, you're talking about, creating products which have got, either for service or for consumption, things like aerospace, technology, or you're talking about deep telecommunications technology, satellite technology, right? That's deep tech, okay? And they all share something in very much in common, which is R&D and the ability to mature technology. Now, technology development today as a global play is a global collaboration, right? So no longer do you do R&D in silo. You do it as a collaboration of multi-parties. And in order to do that, again, you have to have that maturity that I mentioned before, right? So the deep tech space now is something Malaysia must understand. It needs the right investment to be realized. I think the 12 Malaysia plan and the 4.0 policy framework very clearly spells this out. That's what the country needs. But it will be very much a ground up movement, I believe. because it is a very much a people. It's very much dependent on the people and competences, which people have to develop, right?
I was reading about aerospace, and there's just so much innovation taking place. I think I just read this morning that Airbus wants to make the world's first zero-emission commercial aircraft by 2035. And it leads to this question, how can Malaysia be part of this new aviation, albeit, us making a small component of the aircraft even. And I just want to get your thoughts about the trajectory that we're heading, and are we losing out to our competitors? I mean, we used to compete on cost advantage and having a talent industrial base, right? But that's not enough.
Yeah. So yes, the zero emission aircraft, we just completed COP26, I think a week or so ago, and the 1.5 degree limit has been set. Obviously a lot of controversy around that, and there's a lot of pressure on countries like China and India on compliance of that. But nonetheless, these environmental pressures are very real. So I think the point I want to make there is whatever targets have been set, like for Airbus, 2030 zero emissions aircraft, 2050 zero rise carbon emissions down to 1995 levels or something like that. Those are almost hard targets, I believe, right? And now that requires some fantastic innovation, right? Because what is a zero emission aircraft, right? If by today's standards, in an aircraft without an engine, so that means the propulsion systems and so on and so forth are yet to be invented or yet to be certainly yet to be certified, right? So even if the component technologies might be in existence, yes, if Malaysia wants to play a role, it has the components that it's doing now, like I say, engine components, wing components, fuselage components, and these are not small, right? They are significant size components. But when it goes to zero E, there'll be a step change in these components or other components that we might want to have some work in, right? So that requires a lot of design and research capability, right? And we need a depth of those structures. It's got to be organizations like Strand doing the front end, so design, but the back end, there's a lot of institutions doing the research behind what technologies, what materials, what kind of delivery mechanisms, for the new propulsion fuels, right? So all of these things now need to come into play in order for us to have a competitive advantage when we are bidding on these work packages. And digitalization of the supply chain, so it's very important because all of this will be done as a digital supply chain, and there's expectation of a level of transparency in the supply chain in order for you to just bid on the projects. So quite a few moving parts here, Cynthia, that the Malaysian industry has to address, but the foundations of it are there.
So thank you so much for sharing, Naquib. A lot of work on your part as the president of the Aerospace Industry Association. And best of luck with that. And once again, thank you for sharing your ideas and thoughts.
Thanks, Cynthia.
Thanks.
Glad to be here.